utmost importance, well-being. So before I hand over to today's guest, Dr. Sally Bell, there's, as always, a few housekeeping items to cover off. Firstly, we'll be here for around 45 minutes. So what we will do is let Sally introduce herself, then she'll talk through her work and the 5 foundations that underpin health and well-being. And I have to say that Sally is one of the most knowledgeable, passionate and inspiring people that I've heard speak in a long time. What she says not only makes perfect sense, but it really inspires you to take action. So when I heard her speak last year, ever since that, I've been trying to get that 7.5 hours minimum of sleep each night. After Sally's spoken, we'll open up the chat for questions. We would really welcome the interaction and your questions. So please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will pick them up later on. Just before I hand over to Dr. Sally, it's customary to share some statistics on the topic for today. So here are a couple related to well-being in the workplace. So firstly, in a survey by Deloitte, less than 2/3 of workers said their physical and mental well-being are either excellent or good. And for those of us who are interested in financial statistics, Gallup reported that global turnover and lost productivity due to employee burnout amounts to an eye-opening $322 billion per year. Yet, as we are going to hear about today, there is something we can all do. So let's introduce our guest speaker, fresh from a 2-week holiday in the sun. Please welcome Dr. Sally Bell. Sally, thank you very much for joining us today. And as they say, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's a real joy to be with you. And I had a moment coming back to my work emails this morning. It was like, oh, holiday blues. So it's a real joy to end the day talking about what I love and having time with you. I'm going to talk a little bit. I've been asked to talk about strategies for healthy and productive work environments. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own work and my own story, because I think it helps kind of us get into why I talk about a framework and why I talk about these 5 foundations that underpin health. I'll talk a little bit also about what I also think underpins behavioural change, why we find it so difficult to change, and maybe one of the solutions that we might be missing in our approach to behavioural change. And then take a little deep dive, a little bit into nutrition and brain power and sleep and resilience, about what we can be doing to improve those and use those to help us be more productive. And then there'll be time for questions and answers. So I'm a GP, and I have been, so here in the UK, that's a family doctor. I've been a GP for 25 years, and over the last 15 years, I've specialised in something called lifestyle medicine and nutrition. I also have a real keen interest about where our food is produced and how it's produced, and nature. And when I trained back in the 1990s as a medical student, I remember my first couple of years was just amazing. Like, the body is totally wired for healing. We are wired at every level. So genetically for thriving, for feeling good, for living long. It really is stunning, stunningly complex and stunningly beautiful. And I totally fell in love with the science back then. And it has come on so much in the last 30 years. But I remember in my 3rd year, we were shuffled off onto the medical wards. And really, I had this moment thinking, gosh, why have we learned all that kind of brilliant science when now we were told to forget that? Oh, there's somebody on. To forget that and learn how to put people into a disease categorization and follow guidelines that are often very pharmaceutically driven. And I remember as a medical student thinking, this just doesn't make sense. You know, we're moving from treating people to treating diseases, from treating just, just a part of you instead of the whole of you, disconnected from your community and your heritage. And it really didn't make sense. But I went into medicine because I wanted to help people and wanted to be a good doctor. So I just went with the program, went through the training, and I then trained as a family doctor. Spent some years after that in Africa in various war-torn zones. and came back to this country in 2008. I was working as an inner city GP, and this dilemma in me continued of just this sense of treating diseases and not people. I say to people, I got to this point in my career where I felt more like a pharmaceutical vending machine than I did a doctor. You know, you come in with your high blood pressure and I give you these drugs, or your diabetes and I give you those drugs. And there was just never a sense of getting to the root of why somebody was unwell. And I was so tired of treating diseases and not individuals and people, and really getting to the heart of what was going wrong. And we really are faced in, you know, this country and in most Western industrialized countries with crippling pandemic of chronic diseases. Now, chronic diseases are those diseases you can't catch. And they, you know, we have rates of, we just had awful rates about sort of workplace burnout just then, but we have rates where 1 in 2 of us will have cancer in our lifetime. Here in the UK, 2/3 of our adult population are either overweight or obese, and we have escalating problems with autoimmune disease. We have a crisis around mental health, both in youth and adults. You know, 50% of our children, by the time they leave school, have a medical diagnosis, where having a diagnosis is coming to the point is more normal than not having a diagnosis. And I remember grappling with these issues, and I then lost my own health, as is often the case. You know, there's nothing better for really bringing change than crisis. And thank goodness for our health system. You know, I went through the system, had all the scans that I needed to have, and I remember sitting with my neurologist. He gave me a diagnosis, gave me some really potent drugs. And I remember having a moment with him during that process where I said to him, I don't feel you're telling me what's wrong with me. And is there anything that I can do to help me get myself better alongside these medications? And he didn't look up. He pushed another prescription across the desk at me and he said, Sally, try this. I'll see you in 3 months. And I remember walking out of that consultation. It was the tipping point for me. And I decided that I wanted to go back to the books. I wanted to go back to that science that I fell in love with, about our bodies being able to heal ourselves and what we can do to sort of tap into that innate biology that we have within us to help us heal and help us recover and help us enjoy our lives. Now, back then, there wasn't much going on in the UK scene. I actually went to the States to do some training and rethinking. And when you look under the hood of all these chronic diseases that we're faced with as a nation, what we find is that depending on your disease, up to something between 60 to 90% of the chronic disease problems that we have are rooted in our lifestyle. And they are our individual and collective lifestyle choices. And it doesn't take a brain scientist to be able to say, well, lifestyle problems require lifestyle solutions. Now, I always want to put a caveat in that to say that, you know, specialized and medical care and our conventional medical care, you know, is really important and has a place, especially, you know, in trauma. If you go home and have a car accident on the way and you find yourself in ED, and you know, you don't want me standing over you talking to you about getting 7.5 hours sleep and eating your broccoli. You know, you do want specialized care, and there is a place for it, and there is a place for medication. But again, another statistic in the West is that the 3rd cause of death after cancer and after cardiovascular disease is our safe prescribing. It is medication causing death and causing morbidity. And so we have to rethink that, maybe not prescribing first, and think about the things that we can be doing alongside our prescription medications. And so from that experience, I developed a framework where I talk about 5 foundations. I talk about sleep, I talk about movement, I talk about rest, I talk about nutrition, and I talk about connection to self, others, and nature. And using that framework, I was able to recover my own health, and then started a practice alongside my NHS work in the private sector, where I used that to help hundreds of patients over the last decade to recover their health, sometimes still taking medication, sometimes coming off medication. And when you think about those foundations, you know, in the West, we are compromised on every level. You know, you think about sleep, we have to get somewhere between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep at night, and that's asleep, not in bed. And we know that when we don't get that, and I'll touch on this in a minute, it has catastrophic impact on all aspects of our health, whether that's our emotional health, our physical health, our sexual health. Like, sleep is so critical to health. And here in the UK, we on average get 6 hours and 24 minutes sleep a night, which is just grossly, we are grossly sleep deficient. When we think about movement, you know, sort of sitting is the new smoking when it looks at risk. And what's very interesting when you look at the big studies is that even if you go and have that run in the morning for an hour, or you go and hit the weights for an hour, but if you sit for the following 7 hours, whether that's in your car or at your desk, it makes no difference on the type of diseases you get or how long you live. And we need to be embedding our exercise into being active, whether that's getting a standing desk, whether that's always using the upstairs loo, or having your printer away from your desk, parking away from the supermarket door. It's just about being more active that's really important. And when I talk about rest foundation, I'm actually talking about stress. And long before the pandemic with COVID came along, the WHO, the World Health Organization, declared that stress was a global pandemic with catastrophic impacts, you know, on our health. The stress response is a beautiful thing. I think in the workplace, we've talked a lot about stress over the years, and we know that it gets the job done. But chronic stress and living under chronic stress means our body can't do all those other wonderful functions of keeping us cancer-free and boosting our immunity and keeping our gut going and helping our digestion. It gets diverted from that. And that's why we're seeing, one of the reasons why we're seeing so many chronic problems, because we are constantly in that stress response. Nutrition we'll touch on in a minute. And then finally, that other foundation is around connection, which often feels like the fluffy, soft kind of thing, connection to self, connection to others, connection to nature. But more and more we're seeing in the science that actually our body knows what to do, but we need to learn to connect and listen and trust what our body is saying and give it the freedom to make those choices that are aligned with how it wants to live. We know that social isolation is a bigger driver in disease than, you know, our smoking or our diabetes. When you look at something like cardiovascular disease, you know, you can come into my surgery and I can get you off the cigarettes and I can control your blood pressure and I could sort out and reverse your diabetes. But, you know, if I leave you socially isolated and disconnected from community and that sense of purpose, it's not going to make a difference with you, with that risk around getting, you know, cardiovascular diseases. It is so critical part to health. And more, we're also seeing our importance of connecting to our environments, particularly natural environments, you know, getting out into natural environments, the impact that that has on our own health and our own microbes that are going on in and around, you know, our body. So just to go over those again, those key foundations, you know, it's around sleep, movement, rest, nutrition, and connection are the things that underpin our health and actually sort of wire into that innate ability for us to heal. It gives us our genetics, the environment to do what is utterly, utterly brilliant at doing, which is supporting our health, helping us feel good and living long. Now, you know, it's all very well, I can talk a little bit in a moment about what we should be eating and, you know, how we should be sleeping, but you know, one of the things that Andrew said about is you know, it's really difficult to change, and there are loads of theories of change out there. I love Atomic Habits, but there's lots of theories, and really at the end of the day it is finding something that just works for you and having a go at these things. But I think there's always foundations under the foundations, and we need to keep asking questions and keep coming back to what lies behind these things. And I think when I look over the last 25 years of my own work of supporting people making behavioural changes in these areas, there are some critical things that I think are missing. And I just want to mention them to you before we look at nutrition and a little bit on sleep, and then we'll have our questions. And I think, you know, some of the critical things when we're thinking about creating culture and a culture of health within our own lives and within our own families, and in our workplaces, is that actually underpinning behavioral change is the need for play, which we're going to talk about first. So there's a beautiful work done by a guy called Stuart Brown. This is his book, Play: How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. Now, when I was trained in the 90s, we were taught very much that when you get to an adult, that your brain pathways are fixed and there's nothing that you can do to change it. And what we've started to understand over the last sort of 10 years, particularly as we've been able to take more interesting images of the brain, is that that isn't true. And there is something called neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the body, the brain, to rewire and make new neural pathways, which in its turn kind of sets the scene for behavioral change. And I think what is critical to anything that we decide to do, whether it's those few extra press-ups each day or one less cup of coffee or adding that bit of broccoli to your plate, like before we do that, what is critical is that our brain is in that neuroplastic kind of ability to change and make new neural pathways, and the research really is quite robust now, that what underpins that actually is play. We think play is childish. We think it is not productive. We think it is something that, yes, might be important to our children, but as adults, we lose that ability to play. And, we might still play sport, but the thing is, we do sport because we want to stay healthy, and therefore, by its nature, it loses that playfulness in it. And so Stuart Brown, he defines play as being purposeless, all-consuming, and fun. And I would say, like, when we're thinking about these ideas of how to create healthy changes in our life, I think the first question we need to be asking is, are we playful in life? Is my life full of play? What does play look like for me? Stuart Brown, and certainly something that I've started to do in my own clinical practice, is asking these questions and helping people identify what's playful. And there are two questions that Stuart Brown uses. One is, what got you excited as a child and brought you joy in life? And the other is, how can you recreate that feeling of playfulness in your life today? And I found it the most effective way of helping people then make some of the other changes that I ask them to make when we're looking at this idea of creating healthy habits. And I think when we move on immediately towards playful and towards sort of healthy changes without answering this question, I just see people fail time and time again. And so if there was anything that you were to take away today when you're thinking about wanting to create more health in your own life, wanting to create more health in your own office spaces, I would ask the question about playfulness. Ask that question about what got you excited as a child. Where did you lose a sense of time? Where did you just find something that was really restorative and things that you really enjoyed as a child? And I would make that your core thing before you add anything else on into your life. And you might think, well, that's not productive, but actually the neuroscience shows that the more neuroplasticity and the more play, the more productive you are, because your brain is restored and it's in a better sense. It's better at problem solving. It's better at social interactions. It is better at learning. It is better at improving your intellect. It really is one of those key foundations, which I might add to my 5 foundations. I'm so passionate now about play as part of becoming, healthier. So I was going to just touch a moment on nutrition and brain power, take that little deeper dive just for a few minutes, and then sleep, and then we can have, some questions. So nutrition is a very emotive subject, and here in the UK, as medics, we don't get any nutritional training. That's starting to change. And we, over the last 30 years, have reduced nutrition to calories, and we've reduced the idea of food as to something that makes you fat or thin. And we have really lost the value and understanding and importance, the role food has, you know, in terms of our health and well-being. We just seem to think about fat, and we just seem to think, you know, about calories. And we have really demonized the role of fat in our diet. And I think what's started to understand, you know, in terms of the science and what really is coming to light, and nutritional science is a very young science. And so we have to hold lightly a lot of the research out there. And I know it's a very confused area as well. I remember when I started looking into this sort of 10, 15 years ago, you know, you've got Professor so-and-so saying have a high fat diet, and then you've got somebody of equal academic importance saying low fat, and it is really, really confusing. But I think what is really important, and what nearly everybody agrees on, is that the key thing that really is impacting our health from a nutrition point of view is ultra-processed food. Now, here in the UK, 60% of our diet is from ultra-processed food. And it is without a doubt that the thing that would impact our health, our brain power, our ability to be more productive and to be more creative, would be just to get ultra-processed food out of our diet and to adopt a real food diet. Now, what is ultra-processed food? This is the really confusing thing. There is a categorization called the NOVA categorization, which you can go and have a look at if you want to. But the NOVA categorization basically says that what makes ultra-processed food is two things. One, it has foods in it that you wouldn't find in a domestic kitchen. So, you know, you're not opening your kitchen cabinet and adding in E245 and emulsifiers and soy lecithin and etc. And the other thing that we don't always know is that it's been through so many processes, it doesn't represent anything that looks like that original raw food components that came off the field or out of the ground. And that is the thing in terms of the food message that needs to be understood. On the continent, you're a lot luckier, you have better statistics in terms of the ultra-processed foods that you have, that you consume. Here in the UK, we have some of the worst statistics in Europe. But really, the big thing is, you know, are you eating real food? Now, I always say 80-20. You know, 80% of the time, make good decisions about your food and about your health. 20% of the time, like, do what you want. Your body is amazingly able to adapt. But really, the thing is, like anything you buy that is shop bought and pre-prepared, what you need to be doing is flipping over it and reading the ingredients. And if those ingredients you do not understand, they won't be something that you find in your cupboard or in a friend's cupboard who likes cooking, then I would say don't eat it. It doesn't mean that you can't eat packaged food. There are a lot of food out there where it is minimally processed, but you really, really need to be avoiding ultra-processed food if you're thinking about brain health, when you're thinking about productivity, if you're thinking about boosting your immunity, giving your body what it needs to stay cancer-free and viral-free, about balancing mood. It really is about staying away from ultra-processed food. And I think the other message then within that message is what we seem to all agree on too, is that we need to have a plant slant. Now, you don't have to have a plant-only diet. I don't like restrictive diets on the whole. It's great if it works for you culturally and for your family, and you can be very switched on that you don't have any nutritional gaps. But on the whole, you don't have to have a plant-only diet, but we do need a plant slant. We need lots of diversity, lots of colour from different plants. The research shows up to 30 different types of fruit and vegetables should be consumed each week, 30 different types. And it's that diversity that's really critical. And the fibre that is found in plants that is really critical around our health, and in part that's because of the access between our gut and our brain. We have all these wonderful gut bugs that feed on the fiber and all of the lovely different colors and polyphenols and all those micronutrients that come through to the gut that then informs the brain and has an impact on our health and on our mood. And if we're thinking about nutrition and brain power, I think the one thing I'd always also talk about is a need to befriend fats. Like the majority of our brain is made up of fat. The types of fats are something called EPA and DHA, which is found in oily fish. It's very difficult to find it outside of fish. It's very difficult for the body to make. It can make it, but it's very inefficient in doing it. And it would be the one area where I'd say if you're not a fish eater, that it's worth supplementing with fish oils because they're so critical for our brain health. Now, I wanted also just to, I'll just show you this book if you want to have a look. Unprocessed: What Your Diet is Doing to Your Brain by Kimberly Wilson. She's a brilliant psychologist, brilliant around brain health. If you want to get productive and creative and really improve your intelligence and your children's intelligence, it's worth, you know, having a look at that. And then finally, I thought I'd just touch on sleep. So sleep, Andrew just mentioned there, I'm so glad that you're getting your sleep, Andrew. It'll be one of the best things you do. Whoever comes in my clinic, whether they want to lose weight, or whether they want to be viral free, whether they want to improve their energy, I often start with sleep. Honestly, even if you're losing weight, I'll sleep you thin because everything works better. Your body works better when you have sleep. The question really isn't, you know, why sleep? The question really is, why do we ever wake up? It is so potent and powerful. There isn't a drug out there, a supplement out there, an exercise regime out there that can compete with how potent sleep is. So if you are looking for productivity, creativity, whatever area you want to work on, like sleep is really where it's happening. And we need somewhere between 7.5 and 9 hours sleep. You can ask questions about whether you're getting enough sleep, like, do I need coffee to get me going in the morning? Do I feel refreshed? Or you could use one of your gadgets looking at heart rate variability that looks at the quality of sleep. And what's really important with sleep is during the different parts of the sleep and the different phases of sleep, it heals different parts of the body. You know, we have an anti-cancer surveillance system every night that goes around our body and gets rid of precancerous cells. There's a certain point in our sleep, particularly in the morning, where it resets our emotional health. So if we're going through a lot of trauma and things are really difficult, if we lose that bit of sleep, our body's ability to improve emotional resilience is lost. And so sleep is really important for that. We problem solve when we sleep, when we sleep. And so again, if you have things that you're trying to really think outside the box or get through at work, the best thing you want to do is not push on through and do an all-nighter. The best thing you want to do is get that good night's sleep, because you will be able to problem solve better. It improves your physical performance. It improves sexual performance. You know, it heals everything up. It is a really, really beautiful thing. And so making a sleep a priority is important. And so some tips that wire into how we're wired, you know, taps into how we're wired are as follows, which is something you may be familiar with. I can get this sheet to you if you want. But our body operates on clocks. And so, you know, getting a regular schedule is really important to help your body. You know, getting the same bedtime and the same wake up time, even at the weekends. You can't catch up at the weekends. You can't reclaim the damage done from weeks before. We have to have a regular schedule. We have to get the regular amount of sleep. Getting out into sunshine, again, our body is massively related to the light. We have evolved over thousands of years with the light. And when we go outside in the mornings, it suppresses our sleep hormone, melatonin. And then when it gets dark in the evening, so avoiding bright lights and screens later in the evenings, because it then suppresses our melatonin if we don't do that. So what we want is that lovely sleep hormone to jump up so that we're ready to sleep. Avoiding caffeine. Caffeine can stay in your body for anything from 6 to 12 hours, depending on your genetics. So I always say avoid caffeine after midday. Getting active, we know just moving around in the daytime improves sleep quality. Practicing relaxation, you will not sleep if you're highly stressed. It is the body is responding to the stress response. It doesn't want you to be sleeping. It thinks you're in danger, so it wants you to be hyper alert. So making sure you have relaxation practices. Don't open those emails before you go to bed. Don't phone your mother-in-law. Like, really think about using breath work. Think about journaling. Thinking about doing something that helps you wind down so that you're ready to get to sleep. You need to prepare to sleep before you get in bed. Keeping your body cool and your bedroom cool. Your body needs to drop a degree in order to get to sleep. I would say keeping electronic devices away from your bed, partly because they're a distraction. And keeping your bed for sleep and romance. Don't make it your workplace, your office place. Your body gets confused. If it associates it with sleep, you're far more likely to get better quality sleep. If you've had problems sleeping from a very early age, then there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. I would encourage you to go and explore that, because that often is it's more challenging to break, and you have to rethink about how you think about sleep, not just some of those sleep hygiene things. They might not work for you. And there's times when you have to do all of those things, and there's times where actually, other things in life are okay and you only have to do one or two of them. But really, if you're thinking about productivity in your, in your own life and in your workplace, then it really, I would say, eat real food, have that plant slant. And I would start, if you're going to start anywhere, would be really nailing sleep and think about play. So I rattled on there, and there's some resources that, again, I can send this over, but these are voices that I trust. They've written beautiful stuff that's very accessible to laymen and to people who aren't medical. So Tim Spector, follow him on Instagram, totally brilliant. Written lots of great books around nutrition. I've mentioned Kimberly Wilson. Dr. Rangan Chatterjee is very good around all of those foundations that I've spoken about. Again, he has a brilliant podcast if you want to tune in there. Matthew Walker, Why Sleep? If you can't be bothered to listen to his book, just listen to his TED Talk. It's brilliant. Lots of tips around sleep and why we should be sleeping. And then I just put there about the oxygen advantage, because again, breath work in terms of tapping into sleep, which I was thinking of talking about today, but we'll maybe do on another day. Brilliant. So, Andrew, any questions?
I've got loads, as always. And firstly, thank you very much, considering you've not long got off a plane straight from holiday mode back into well-being mode. I think it's really impressive. You've delivered that again with such passion and enthusiasm. We'd welcome any questions from the audience. I'll just give it a moment, see if any pop in. While we're doing that, I'll just pick up on a couple of things I heard. The subject of play, and obviously you've mentioned this a couple of times while I've heard you speaking. This is quite mind-blowing, really, when you talk about it. So what I took from this was that ultimately, if we are wanting to make these changes in our lifestyle, this is almost a gateway to it. Then is that what we're saying? We need to go back to, because if you think about a child, for example, all my kids I'm not, which is embarrassment, bilingual. All my kids are bilingual, and they learned it just by going to school and daycare, because they had that sort of open mind and they weren't restricted by any limitations. Is it a sort of similar concept, this? We go back to this childlike state, we're almost creating the pathway to make these meaningful changes.
Yeah, I think there's some other things I didn't mention there. So I think play is yes, it sets the foundation for your body to create new neural pathways, which is all to do with behavioral change and habit, because what you're trying to do is make new habits, eat real food, getting sleep, managing your stress. Like, there are all these demands on us. And I think when your body is rigid and in that stress response, which we are all currently living under, then our brain is fixed and we are setting ourselves up to fail. And actually what play does, and I think where the research is going, is what beauty does and nature does. You know, being in beautiful environments and being in natural environments, I think the science will also open up to that and is getting to that place, is showing that it creates this kind of soft, malleable changes in our brain so that we can make new pathways. So then we can add in that, right, I'm going to eat an extra vegetable, or I'm going to, you know, stick to my sleep routine. And but without that, we set people up to fail, and we just reinforce this, I can't get there. And so I think play, and then it becomes fun. Like health should be fun, life should be fun. What is the point? Like, what is the point if we're not enjoying life on the whole? And so I think realizing how important play is and really pursuing it in our lives just sets us up to perform better in every area, and as well as improve intelligence and be more productive, which is what most companies want. So I think, you know, it's not about trying harder. Let's just forget that. It doesn't work. Let's be playful. Let's think how we can be playful. And I think the other thing to say, Andrew, is that as with all things, we have a philosophy that we have developed with the scientific method over the last 200 or 300 years that wants to reduce everything into a kind of monoculture and an algorithm. And you know, we need to personalize this. What you find playful, I might find stressful. And, you know, and so personalizing play, or what one office in Holland might find playful. I never forget being with a Dutch team in Sudan, and we watched Peter Kay live at Bolton, who's a comedian, and the British part of the team were absolutely wetting themselves, and the Dutch part of the team were like, what is this? What is wrong with them? And so again, like, you might have a philosophy of everybody's going to do this playful stuff, but it needs to be personalized to your culture and to your office. And so again, this idea that just as health needs to be personalized, you know, play needs to be personalized, our food cultures need to be personalized. You know, there is an old diet that fits everybody. And then also, I just think with the behavioral change thing, which I think is utterly missed, is again, after 25 years of helping people change, I can split people within minutes into 3 categories, and I know the ones that will succeed. They're the ones that know that they were loved right from the beginning, and they have a self-love and a value, and I can ask them to do anything, and with some support they will change. There are those that know they are not loved and don't have any value for themselves, and that's often rooted in childhood. And there are those that the same group, but they've done their internal work and they have value. And so again, I think like asking for behavioral change without dealing with some internal work around love and being in a loving environment means that we cannot change. And so love, I think, is critical. And again, it seems fluffy and non-scientific and keep it out of the corporate world. But I will do anything for a boss who loves me and values me. And so I think being playful, you know, making it personal and having love as foundations that underpin our behavioral changes is critical to make, you know, the most of our health.
Great, thanks. Actually, we had a question come through. Can you give an example of how you play? So we'll get to that in a second. But you just mentioned that it's a very personal thing. Before we get your answer, I did write this down actually as you were asking these questions. So I was thinking back to my childhood. I was having memories of running around my back garden at home playing football or cricket or golf, and basically tearing up my parents' lawn, which now looks nothing. They're still in the same house, and it's could be on garden as well, this garden now, but back then it didn't look like anything like that after I'd finished with it. I wrote down fishing, although I don't do that anymore. Golf, I think it's questionable because I can tend to get caught up in my own expectations playing golf. It can trigger your ego quite easily. So I wrote down those things, and I wrote down gaming. All of these things are what my kids are into as well. So I was kind of thinking I can bolt it onto that to make sure I'm getting time with them and doing the things they enjoy as well. Back to the question, what are your favorite aspects of that? And how do you play?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important for me is I need to be moving and I need nature. So, you know, as a child, I was the weird child that didn't like parties or, you know, meeting up with friends. I would be the child on her own in the garden, you know, digging up worms, making, you know, hanging out with my animals. And so for me, making sure that I constantly put myself in the environment of nature where my hands get in the dirt, and having solitude within that's really critical for me. I love problem solving. Give me a jigsaw. You know, again, I'm the one at Christmas that's got my, you know, sherry and doing a jigsaw on her own, and I totally love it. I lose hours. Like, my family absolutely laugh at me. And so, you know, those are some of the critical things that making sure I'm in that environment. I love the problem solving, you know, side of things. But I also recognize in myself that I love solitude, but too much solitude is really bad for me. And I think there are friends that bring a playful side out of me. They get me to a place that I can't get to. And so I have critical people in my life that I make sure I have a date with them at different, you know, on a regular basis, because they make me laugh and we will do fun things together that I just wouldn't do on my own. So I think it's, you know, who brings you alive, who brings that life out into you, you know, what's the environments that make you full of life, and then what are the things that you like doing.
Great, thank you. If there's any more questions, please keep them coming. Just to touch on a couple of other areas while I wait for that. The nutrition. So as you mentioned, this is a bit of a minefield. What interests me, have you seen this Nutri-Score thing that they're doing? I don't know if it's just to Europe only. I know you said the Nova categorization. So if I give you an example, I don't know if I should name a product, so I won't, but there are these plant-based yogurts. So I try and eat as much non-dairy plant-based food as I can. They're graded as an A. It gets a Nutri-Score of A. But if I was to go and get it out of the fridge and look at the back of it, it will probably have some of these things that you won't find in my kitchen. Yeah, olive oil gets a C, and as far as I know, olive oil is quite good for you. But so, what's your take on these sort of Nutri-Scores? How do we navigate that? Yeah, what would you advise?
So I think we have a similar thing here in the UK, and they're often based on calories, sugar content, and fat content. And we have demonized fat, and you know, we're now starting to demonize sugar, but we're switching to artificial sweeteners, which are problematic. And calories has very little to do with weight. Which might be a surprise for most. It really is what you're eating. The calories come into it to a degree, like if you do consume way more, but the science around it's really, really weak. And so I think it's still based on all this very outdated science. I would sit with a kind of Tim Spector and really pursue, you know, all the stuff around the gut microbiome that he's doing, and nutrient density, and, you know, that sort of plant slant and real food. I think that really is, you know, where it is, and it's common sense. Like, yes, go and get your plant-based thing, and it will have emulsifiers in. It's probably got, if to keep the calories down, it's probably got artificial sweeteners in. You know, and so we have evolved over 70,000 years with our diet, you know, with our food. So just think, what would we have been eating a few hundred years ago, and try and mimic, you know, that. So yeah, I have a problem with these scores.
Yeah, thanks. I'm conscious of the time, to let everyone go and do some play, as it's that time of the day. Before the final question on sleep, and then I've got one more question after that. Presumably, if we're going to need to get 7.5 hours, we've got to build some allowances in, especially as parents, that we might get some disturbance. So we probably need to allow for maybe more like 8, is it, to allow for being woken up, or things like that.
there's something called sleep efficiency. So even really good sleepers, their efficiency is only usually about 90%. So the science is we need a certain amount of sleep. I think the cost to us as parents when our kids are young is our health. If you measure somebody's sort of genetic age, you see it accelerate during those years because of the cost. So yes, you are totally right. It isn't just about hitting the sack at midnight and then getting up at 7:30. You need to prepare to go to sleep. You really do. Like, dimming the lights, winding down, stopping eating, turning off your screens. That's all preparation for your body to get into that sort of physiologically to get ready to sleep. It can't just switch off.
Great, thanks. Any final tips to get started outside of the play, the sleep?
Yeah, I think what's really important is that, it's about holding the right questions, isn't it? And it's around having, as I said, sort of 80-20 approach. Like, we don't have to get it all right. And so I always start by asking questions like, what is my culture around food? How am I doing with my 30 vegetables? What is my sleep? Like, I think it's starting with an audit, isn't it? A personal audit, whether that's within your own life or whether you're doing that in terms of the culture within the office. What is our food culture? And how do we respond to emails at 2 o'clock in the morning? Like, what asking some questions, I think, is where we start. And then it's asking the question, well, do I have the grace to change in this season of life? If you're grieving or you've got a sick child, it's not the time to be changing. And so I think one, asking questions of ourselves, two, looking at whether we're ready to change, three, getting playful, and then four, just those whatever change you want to do, whether that's Atomic Habits or whoever you want to follow. It's then incorporating those changes.
I have got one more question. It's a bit of a desert island disc type question. I wrote this down. I have to ask. You said you felt like a pharmaceutical vending machine. So what do you feel like now?
A healer.
A healer.
It's a bit of a fluffy word, isn't it? I went into medicine to help people feel good about themselves and try and live their best life. And I love what I do now. I love it. And I get to see people enjoy their lives. So yes.
Brilliant. Great answer. It ties that shoulder perfectly into the progressing lives purpose that we have as a business, a healer. We will share like you said, there's some of the material. We'll put something up, I'm sure, on our LinkedIn feed. We'll also obviously put a link to how people can find you and do more research on this journey. Dr. Sally Bell, thank you very much for joining us on Let's Talk, and as always, really inspiring. So as I said, I'm off to do a play analysis now and do a bit more of that. So thank you very much.
All right.
And thanks very much for everyone for joining.
Great. Thank you.